It was noontime today in the center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the avenue of eternal peace.
Hello, Rye. Welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass Podcast, Kevin and Chuck. Today, we're going to talk about prepping your home for wildfires or fires in general. I don't know, a lot in the news in California, a lot of stuff going on and big fires. It seems like those Santa Ana winds just kind of, every couple of years just get so out of control, and it just takes a little bit to, you know, help spread that and stir the pot. Wind is so crazy with how it can, change with fire. I mean,
Mhm.
you add the conditions of dryness and whatever, which one is always the case in California. Then you kick that up with a little wind, and you're just asking for trouble. Um, so we're gonna dig into how to prepare your house, what type of cool stuff you should be buying, what type of stuff, what you need to be looking for, worrying about, how you can actually prep your home in the moment and beforehand. I got some cool stories. We got a lot of good things to get into. So I don't know, Kevin. Like, do you even like, how do these fires start? It always seems like it. You have the guy smoking. We remember in history there were some really big ones: the Chicago fire, San Francisco. What do you? The Chicago fire. You were telling me about that. What happened there?
Yeah. So that was the Great Chicago Fire was 1871, and it
Okay,
burned for 2 days in October. It killed 300 people. It left 100,000 people homeless. Um, there was a long drought leading up to it. So I mean that's one of the things about these about the fires that start. It usually starts with, a long drought,
right.
So that's one of the things to be wary of. And wildfires can happen anywhere. Um, City fires don't happen as often anymore because most cities aren't made out of wood anymore. But
Right.
they still happen. Now the Great Chicago Fire, they never figured out exactly what happened,
But
and
we
there's
blamed
the
a cow.
yeah, the old story is it was Miss O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern, but it started in her shed, not in her barn.
Okay.
So we don't really know what happened, but it burned 3.3 square miles of the city burned down, and it crossed over the river from one side to the other. And that's generally just wind carrying embers from here to there,
And
and
that's the thing. Like ambers, that's where you get into such danger.
right,
San Francisco. So that's the thing, like, everyone's like LA, like, "Oh, it's because of the city, or it's because of some government conspiracy of, laser beams from heaven starting fires in LA," but
hmm
California's had some fires in the past. It's not a new
yeah,
thing
it's not the
for
first
California
time this has happened, right?
catch on fire. I mean, I actually am always amazed when we look into it that I'm always like, how are there not more houses being destroyed every year in California when you hear about all those wildfires? Like,
hmm
damage is usually pretty minimal. Obviously, this year is a big exception, and
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons where everybody's talking about it. But um, so way back, the biggest, actually, they say the most deadly earthquake in history was the San Francisco fire, which,
Right.
as you know, is caused by an earthquake, hence the most deadly
The earthquake,
earthquake, right?
right.
So it was caused by an earthquake in 1906, but they said they said a few hours, so I don't know what that means, 2 to 3 hours. 52 separate fires had started after the earthquake,
All in different places,
all
huh?
in different
Wow.
places, and then it's just like, plus an earthquake, it's tougher to move through the streets, things change and are
Mhm.
unsafe, and you don't know, and gas lines are, rupturing, and things are happening, and, that ended up taking a toll of 3,000 people.
Yeah,
So, yeah, that's
that's a big one.
significant. Um, so let's kinda get to the meat within the nut here, and, what can you do? Now, there's obviously, we're going to talk about some construction. We're going to talk about things that you can, equipment you can buy to help prevent fires, or help fight fires, deter fires, any of that. But let's talk about, like, when you get the call, you turn on your radio and you're like, hey, a big wildfire just broke out next to you. What are you going to do? So let's kind of jump into it. So, one of the big things, they say you want to close every door and every window within your house.
Hmm.
What that is, how, like, when you open and allow fresh air into
Right.
some, you wanna close every door and window, but you also wanna leave every door and window unlocked, because you want to allow access for firemen and things like that,
Right.
right? So you wanna stop air from moving, but you don't wanna stop people from moving, right? That's the big thing. You wanna shut off the gas at the gas meter. That would be a smart play if you want
Hmm.
to be the one that's standing. Um, you want to clear the debris around your house. Now, they always talk about a fire break should be about 30 feet. Now, obviously, the further away you can clear out, the
The
better.
further, the better.
But
Yeah, but if I was living in a drought, in an area where droughts were common, like California, a lot of
yeah,
parts of California, I think I would do a basic standard, you know, weekly or biweekly cleanup. Just rake everything out.
especially in the right seasons, right? They're actually talking about, after this fire, about how requiring laws of more fire, prevention, as far as no flammable anything within 5 feet of a house and things like
Hmm.
that. They were talking about different things they were going to implement. The more I dug into it. Uh Another thing, so like I said, shut off the gas meter. Any kind of outside cushions, anything flammable out there in the yard. So you're going to want to take those and put them in the garage, put them in somewhere where they're not going to be exposed to flying ambers, right? That's kind of
Hmm.
thing. Same thing with propane tanks. They were saying ideally you move it 30 feet away from the house, but if that's not an option, you're going to want to put them in the basement, in the garage. And, I guess California doesn't have a lot of basements, but you
Yeah.
want to put it in the most secure area that you can. Um, they said, connect hoses. Now, this is something I didn't really consider in my mind. They were saying that you should actually connect as many hoses with, like, spray nozzles,
Hmm.
and have them turned on, but obviously not spraying out water, right? That would be just a waste and getting rid of water when you're about to need it. But
Hmm.
connect hoses and have the nozzles and stuff ready to go, actually laying about your yard. And that's going to just, the guy I was listening to was like, any opportunity that a firefighter has to, do something easy and quick when they're fighting an overwhelming thing is
Hmm.
going to make it so much better. They were saying even staging ladders on the side of your house and putting them, like, even up on your roof where it's just ready to go.
Hmm.
Somebody's a lot more likely to take advantage of that than something where, it's not easy to stop and help. Another thing, you're going to want to maybe fill buckets of water and actually just leave them around your property. Believe it or not, every little bit kind of helps. And having some storage like that can really, make a difference.
Hmm.
Um, the You want to maybe stage your vehicle, like have it backed in your driveway, like ready to go. One of the big things with fires, that as they start to spread and get crazy, you don't realize how impossible it is to see and how hard, visibility becomes. They said, turn on every light inside and outside, beforehand.
Hmm.
Because you can't imagine how dark it gets when you get that kind of overwhelming smoke and coming in. And it can really make a big difference in the visibility. But that's why you want to have your car kind of loaded up with anything you think you're going to want to rush out of there. Have
Hmm.
it kind of staged and ready. Um, One of the things I probably should have mentioned right out of the gate was, you know, the first thing you want to do, and even before any of the advice here, is you want to be listening to what the local, authorities are telling you. If they're like, hey, you need to get out of there because, you standing there with a hose is a bad idea, you're going to get overwhelmed and overtaken.
Right.
That's what you need to do, right? Turns
And if
out the
you've
one
seen
thing
how fast some of these fires can move, it really can be, you
and
know,
turn on it's terrifying.
on top of you.
Um, yeah. So having a plan and actually listening to what's going on, paying attention, looking at the smoke and the stuff around you too is important when you're not, when other people aren't watching. You might be the first person to see that it's overtaken the hill next to you or whatever. So
Mhm.
you being observant is a big part of things, but you may want to, keep an eye on things.
Yeah.
So
Now, we say, have the stuff in your car that that you wanna save. Um, get your bug out bag together and have it in the vehicle,
I
your
like it.
documents, your Social Security card, your birth certificates, all
A
that sort
picture
of
of your
stuff.
cat.
Make sure you're prepared to move your animals if you're, planning on it. I mean, who doesn't wanna really come home when their house is destroyed, but at least you've got a roast chicken to eat. So, I mean, there
Kevin,
is there is some
Kevin.
things that you might wanna leave behind just in case. But, one of the things that I surprised me is the N95 masks. They recommend keeping those because they're
Yes,
really good at stopping
the
the
smoke
particles in the
inhalation.
air. Yep.
Yep.
I didn't think that they were for that, but they actually work pretty well
The
in that
N95
situation.
especially, the thicker, it really
Mhm,
makes a big difference. Um, Another thing is any kind of vent. Remember I had mentioned, windows and things like that. Any kind of vent on the outside of your house, you
mhm.
wanna cover those up with, like, foil tape ideally.
Uh-huh.
They recommended maybe even making covers beforehand that you could screw on, like, out of wood or metal. That
Mhm,
would be awesome. They said at a minimum duct tape or even aluminum foil, just slapping it over the vents, because
mhm,
anywhere air is sucking in, that's where, you're getting into trouble. Um, you wanna shut off your HVAC. Any
mhm,
kinda air conditioning or heat, fires actually happen in the wintertime, it turns out.
mhm.
Um, any kind of heat or air conditioning, you wanna shut it off so that it's not, going to, be sucking in air, right? Because that's where you get into trouble. So just keep that in mind. Another thing, believe it or not, when you have a fence around your property, they say open your gates. And what happens is actually fire can travel through, like, it follows the fence, it
Mhm.
burns all along, and it actually works like a fire break if you
If the
open
gate
that gate
and then
as
there's a
one.
space.
Obviously, if you have a chain link fence, opening that gate isn't really gonna help
Right.
you, that's not, but allowing access to the firefighters, that's kinda cool. Same thing, you don't wanna have any kind of locked gates or anything for the firefighters, you wanna make sure you open access to anybody coming in. Keep in touch with, like I said, a NOAA radio or something where you're hearing the emergency warnings coming out. You want like the most local news station, that you have available to do there.
Mhm.
To be going, listening, whatever,
Right.
that kind of thing. But
Yeah. Now, when they say evacuate, I know Chuck and I normally will recommend you don't take off. You know what I mean? Bugging out isn't always the best situation, but there are certain cases, and this is one of them,
when
where
your
it's best to
neighborhood's
just
burning
get the
down,
fuck out of there. Yeah.
yeah.
Don't hang out. Don't try and fight the fire and save your house. You know, you should know ahead of time whether or not your house is covered, for fire insurance, and most insurance policies, that's one of the things they cover, but not all of them.
Not all of them, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things is, guess what? It's a 5-minute phone call to call
Mhm.
your insurance agent. "Hey, where do I stand on floods? Where do I stand on earthquakes? Where do I stand on fires?"
Mhm.
Have those questions and be like, "Hey, what's going on? How am I protected? And, hey, what's the difference? What would it cost me to be covered for fire? Do you recommend another company that does fire if you don't? Like that I
Mhm.
can add fire on to whatever I'm doing or whatever. You know, it's better to ask these questions before than to hope for the best and find out later.
Right.
And find out that maybe you didn't have the coverage that you thought you did. Um, that's the big thing that you want to think about. Now, I was looking into stuff. I see a lot of like YouTube shorts and things like that, things on TikTok or wherever that are like, oh, this celebrity's house didn't burn down. Find out why, like, and obviously, because, Satan was protecting him is my guess, but,
Right, right.
looking out for his people, right?
Mhm.
No, but it was things like, hey, look, Jennifer Aniston had a fire suppression system on her house. And maybe that's something you might want to do. And to be honest, if you live in a really volatile area like that where fires are very common, and maybe you're just a good prepared guy, there are a lot of different options and a lot of different budgets that, things that you could do. Uh, so I looked into it. I looked on Amazon and different things. I looked at a lot of different fire suppression. They started out really big. Like when I went to YouTube, I saw one called, actually, let me find the perfect one here. There was one called the Hydro Cannon. And if you search, I think Hydro Halo, uh, this guy had a cart that you could drop a hose into your swimming pool or a pond, and they basically had 2 setups, but this stuff was not cheap. You were talking like 5,500 or 6,500, but it basically is like a trash pump kinda thing that's sucking
Mhm.
the water out and setting you up with real hoses that you're fighting fires. Now again, this is when you end up in the wrong spot and things are going bad, because in theory, you wanna get the hell out of there.
Yeah, and
We
and the
we don't
truth
want
is
you getting hurt
yeah, the
trying to
truth is
fight a
if you're gonna
fire.
spend the money on that thing, boy, I'd have a hard time fucking evacuating my house if I spent 6 grand, getting a
I gotta
fire
get
system
I'm
that is
loading
still
the
gonna
fire
break
system
down.
into the car as I'm
Uh-huh.
driving out, right?
But
Um,
I mean, you get out there and you're all surrounded in your house, but your house is safe, and then your pool runs out of water and
right.
you're up shit's creek.
So there was another one. I mean, the prices range to all kinds of different things. So there was one called the Iron Owl,
Mm,
and this thing was like 159 bucks, and it basically is one of those little spigot sprinklers,
mhm,
and it just connects in on your roof eave, on the bend in your roof there, and you can just connect them. And to be honest, if you had 3 of those and keeping your roof wet, big difference in, things. I did see there was another one called the Fire Bozz, and that thing is a little more substantial, but honestly, it didn't look like anything more impressive. Uh, I think that the spigot was designed that it actually could handle some like chemicals, like fire suppression chemicals and like thicker foam and crap like that, fire retardant. And
mhm.
that the sprinkler shot like 100 to 300 feet radius. So that's huge. But that was also like 4,700 bucks. So, but that $159, little iron owl, I got to say, kind of cool. You could just put 2 or 3 of those up there, because I gotta say, if I'm turning it on and leaving my roof covered with a hose,
Mhm.
that sounds like my house has got way better odds, because it's those ambers that come in and
Right.
drop on your roof that are what take you out. And, there were other things I looked at, about 550 bucks. I saw something, it said firefighter 1, fire hose for pool pumps, but it didn't really add up to me because it was just using the pressure from your pool pump to shoot the water, and I just can't imagine you're getting enough pressure out of that.
Right. It
I
doesn't seem like you're really spraying getting that
Nope.
much of a distance based on the idea that you have a swimming pool, you know?
Yes,
So if
sorry.
you're one of those
Yeah.
poors out there, you
Like
know,
the rest of the world? Yeah,
yeah, get your life together. Jesus. Your water pressure in your house is gonna go down. You know, they
right,
always tell people not to open up the fire hydrants because it decreases the water pressure if there's a real fire.
right.
And some places that's a legitimate thing to worry about. Um, but if there's a wildfire going on, you're probably not the only asshole out there with a hose trying to hose everything down before you leave.
Yeah. Um, the we also had they had a backpack fire pump that held like 5 gallons, and I
Mhm,
got to say it was pretty impressive for like fighting spot fires. It
mhm,
was like 250 bucks or something. the supply cache is the place that sold that. Might be worth looking into. Again, we actually did a off-grid living firefighter kind of episode about, having your own fire truck basically and building things, different things you can do. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. You guys can check that out, cuz I mean there are other things that you can do, but these are you're kind of the guy in town and what you can do.
Mhm.
Now FEMA actually put out a book called Home Builder's Guide to Construction in Wildfire Zones. And to be honest, they had some pretty good ideas. One of the things is the type of material you build your house out of. Having a stone house, or, maybe the stone they do that what do you call it? The white
Stucco.
stucco, that's the one on the outside, that, things like that are gonna obviously help your odds a little bit. Um, obviously we want things to be aesthetically beautiful, but you also don't want it burned down. It's not
Right.
as beautiful when it's charred and fallen in on itself. I got to say that. A big thing that kind of anybody can do, and you can do with your house existing now, it comes at a price, but having a metal roof. Um, I know in Alaska and stuff like that, where in very wildfire prone areas, it's very common to have metal siding as a way to go on your house. And
Mhm.
that's something, again, I know California is always trying to be beautiful, but I'm sure they're going to start rethinking a lot of things now and how they do it. And I know
Yeah.
everybody kind of seems to be very reactionary in how we do things.
Yeah.
um like something bad happens and then it's like, oh, everything changes to match that.
Right.
And then but then the next thing happens and we're always kind of chasing our tail. But
Mhm.
fire
Always fighting
prevention
the
is
last
something
war.
always worth, being afraid of. Fires are terrifying.
Mhm.
Um, the FEMA book talked about how there should be kind of zones of boundary outside your area. And like the initial, everybody kind of seemed to agree that the initial 30 feet is really where you want to be. And it's weird because if you're on a hillside, they really expand that number too. They want like 100 feet.
Right.
But the initial 30 feet is kind of crucial to keep any kind of flammable bushes, leaves raked up. One of the big things, keeping your gutters clean, is a big one. Um, Wood piles. Turns out wood actually burns, and if you have a bunch of logs sitting next to your house, that's a no-go. So you either want to put that inside your garage or you want to put it, out away 30 feet from your property. And in a perfect fantasy world, you have like it on a gravel kind of pit kind of thing where it's
Mhm.
not going to be. I mean, you can do what you can do, right? You may want to rethink living in California. I mean, there's a lot of issues that, you can do. It's a horrible thing to say, Kevin. You're a mean, hurtful person.
Yeah. Well.
Um, Reduce, uh, prune and like take care of dead trees and dead shrubs, and you end up with a lot of like debris that is like, I know I have woods on my property, and there's a lot of dead brush underneath. And
Mhm.
that's where things start and escalate and can really, get out of hand. So you may want to, look into that. Now, like I've actually been exposed to some fires in my life. I mean, it started out when I was a little kid. I was like 4 or 5 years old. Our neighbor's house caught on fire. And it was to the point, it was like 2 in the morning and fire department's banging on the door. Hey, there's a big fire right next to your house and you need to get out and evacuate. And, you're standing in the street in the middle of the winter time and whatever. But it, when something is like full on in flames like that and just engulfing, it's amazing and terrifying, and it, it is horrible. We had And then later on in life, my family had a cottage, it's like my grandparents or whatever, up in Canada. And again, out in the middle of nowhere. And I think what they decided was that it was actually somebody had probably broke in and rob the place, and then
Mhm.
to kind of cover their tracks, they set it on fire so that way you wouldn't know that it was robbed, kind of, or it just like none of it added up. Nobody's like, oh, criminals are really smart people.
Right.
It's a little iffy on the details, but I know that one of the only things left after it all kind of burned to the ground was a still. They had an old still that was like in the melted pile of metal in the middle of the room or something along that line. Obviously, to make clean water because that's
Right.
what
Yeah,
you
that's I'm
use a
sure
still.
that's what they're doing there. Yeah.
You have to have your priorities. But yeah, there's always, and the fire department though, same thing, was like 2 hours to get there because the
Yeah.
nearest thing was just forever away. And they're like, oh, we don't plan to save your house. We're just trying to keep the rest
Yeah.
of
Less
Canada
than
from burning
the
down,
neighborhood to
yeah,
burn down. Yep.
exactly.
Yeah. I think a lot of those things a lot of those fires are, you don't realize it, but you lose everything, you know? A friend of mine's house burnt down a long time ago and like just clothes. They didn't have any clothes to wear. They were out at work and the house caught on fire and
Yeah,
that's it. Everything's gone. Anything that you owned, anything that ever had. I had another friend of mine whose house caught on fire and he was an older guy and I mean, I I thought it was a fire trap to begin with when just knowing the house. And he barely got out of there. He grabbed his guitars on his way out.
obviously.
He left a coffee can with $5,000 in cash inside and grabbed his guitars instead. And then he set the guitars against his car and went back about stuff. And by the time he got back, the guitars had all melted and burnt up anyway.
Hmm.
So he just didn't get him far enough away from the house.
I know I used to have this pretty awesome dime bag. You know, I think it's like a Rodin Razor or whatever, some kind of
Dimebag
cool
Daryl.
guitar, and yeah,
Yeah.
and I was the man, and I sold it on eBay, and the girl was in Texas, and she was like, "Gee, was all the lacquer on it all bubbled up and like this when you shipped it?" And I'm like, "No." And so it turns out the heat can really do some damage on those kind of things. But the big thing is you want to choose when you're building your house. You want to think about these things, both from location as well as, I mean, obviously hindsight, right? We all have the
Right.
house we have, right?
Mhm.
The one I have is surrounded by pine trees, and to clear 30 feet out from my house would get rid of a lot of the reason I appreciate my house, right? I
Mhm.
also don't live in a really wildfire prone area, but things happen. And everything is a choice. And I guess that's what it comes down to. It's not, I'm not saying, "Oh, you're dumb. Why do you live there?" I mean, California is awesome. California has some great temperature, some great, exciting life and things happening, some
Mhm.
horrible taxes, some horrible prices.
You know,
It's summer all year long. I mean, you just can't beat that.
I had a relative that lived up. It was a little bit west of Sacramento, and it was up in the Sierra Mountains, I think. And they they had their kid had a fire, and they kid did everything that you're supposed to do in a normal place. But this isn't, it's not a normal place. They're really fire prone, and he put it all out, buried the coals and things, and a couple hours later, it started up. And he said he called the fire department. And the fire truck showed up, and the guy came up to his house and asked for a cup of coffee. He's like, "Don't you see this like fire going all around?" And he said once they turned on the engines, though, it's like the amount of water they were putting out, like it's wasn't a real issue. It hadn't gotten out of control yet. And but he was saying that he wonders why people worry about like terrorists, like people doing like the 9/11 attacks. It was not that long after it. He said you
Right.
could just drive around California during a drought and throwing burning pieces of paper out the window and cause as much, if not more damage than that.
If people are evil, there's always opportunity, I think.
Right. And I know that there's a lot of people that a lot of these fires are actually started by arsonists, by
And
crazy
that's
people.
like I kept looking up for the LA fires, they're like, yeah, it could have been people we don't know. We're
Yeah, they don't
just
know what it is. I know there's speculation it was electrical equipment.
right. It's
But I
just
mean, they don't know. It could be
right.
anything.
The
At least right
conditions
now,
were
they don't
ripe
know.
for any bad opportunity. I mean, a
Hmm.
lightning strike, anything, cars backfiring. I mean, just crazy things that actually,
Hmm.
when it's super dry, things can
Yeah.
happen.
I mean, a cigarette butt somebody flicks out the window is
It
enough to
really
start
is
with.
crazy. It's enough. And believe it or not, I've seen a lot where I live now. Um, over this year, I think I was driving home. uh, It was probably 2 months ago, and somebody's whole front lawn was on fire. And it clearly started from the road and was like going up their lawn of dried
Right.
grass. I was like, how does this happen? It's and these things just happen. I mean, they don't just happen, but they happen from the thrown out cigarette, lasers from space, right?
Yeah.
These are the
Space
whatever.
lasers.
They just happen.
I know. Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's the that genius congresswoman from Florida. Um, she was saying that the deep state needs to get their weather machine going and get some rain
Yes.
over there. Um, I don't know why they're not doing that, but they're not getting the rain moving. So
Exactly. If you could just
damn deep
weather it,
state. Hmm.
put it in the computer, rain in California, check.
Hmm. Turn that
It's
drought
probably
off.
they're so worried about the water, they probably don't even want the rain though. The government, I mean, not the
Hmm.
people. People are it turns out people aren't always 100% lockstep in line with the government. But that's it. I mean, the big thing is, be aware of what's going on, pay attention to the weather. Hey, it's the fire season. Hey, turns out my fire department has a burn ban in effect. Maybe you shouldn't be burning. That's obviously, I'm not saying these fires started from something like that. I'm
Right.
just saying
But I mean, we had a
the more
significant
we
drought
pay
here.
attention, right? The more
Yeah.
we pay attention and follow, the better the outcome is going to be for everybody. And
Hmm.
that's a big thing. But it turns out, like I had this experience at work not that long ago where, I have some medical training and things like that. And we have medical people on staff at work that if something bad happens, they come out and handle it. They really weren't able to handle it, and turns out don't know CPR or things that you would assume would be the very basics of a
Yeah.
medical train. But my whole point of why I'm saying this is, you can actually do things to help the firemen. You
Hmm.
don't have to be like, "They're professionals, let them handle it." Now, as far as your safety, they're professionals, let them handle it. I'm not saying put yourself in a bad situation, but I'm saying don't sit there blindly when you could be doing something.
Hmm.
That's what I'm saying. Turns out you were responsible for you and you kinda care about your stuff more than anybody else does.
Right.
And that's something you need to think about. Now, does that mean if, your house is surrounded by, everything horrible, you shouldn't be getting out of there. You should have got out of there before that window closed. But, having things in place and set up, that's kind of cool. Um, and like Kevin said, water can run out as things are, you know, going on. Obviously, there were some stories about, firefighters saying, well, it's your own problem if, your house is on fire and I'm not coming in. You should have left when we put the thing. And it is frustrating to when you ignore all the safety, you
Hmm.
can't expect other people to risk their lives
Right.
to come save you. Like if the government comes out and they put on every single channel, every single radio station, hey, you need to evacuate. They're sending emergency text to your phone. Get out of your house, leave now, and you stay and don't do anything. You're kind of on your own. That's always they do that with hurricanes, right?
Right.
You have to
They're not.
evacuate
Yeah, they're not coming to your house in the middle of a hurricane to help you out.
after they
You know,
told you to leave.
after the
It's
hurricane, that's a different story. If they can get there, they will. But they're not going out in 120-mile-an-hour winds and downpours
yeah.
of rain. so that they can come help you out when you should have been gone anyway.
And I understand they made a choice. They're a firefighter. You're not, whatever. But you don't want to put somebody else in danger based on your bad decisions.
Hmm.
That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying be aware and, respectful of other people. Turns out they have value too. Um, but anyway, that's it. So make sure you guys comments, fire stories, advice. Maybe I missed something. Like I said, cutting a fire break. One of the prepper novels, speaking of fire breaks, I read, they actually, guy had like a bulldozer and stuff, and he kind of made berms around his house and like
Hmm.
built up dirt. But that's going to be if you have time, right? You,
Right.
you only have so much
And a
time
bulldozer.
and a bulldozer, right? But these are things, I mean, a good tractor, whatever, it just takes time. But if you can push back, and there's nothing wrong with, hey, there's a bunch of trees that are closer than 30 feet, maybe I can cut those down and push them back as fire is approaching,
Hmm.
because sometimes days in advance, hey,
Right.
there's wildfires getting closer and closer. Sometimes you don't.
Hmm.
So it's all about, using your judgment and doing the best you can, but know that things can get out of hand quickly. I think that's the best advice for fire stuff
Hmm. And
that I can give you.
so what do you think about this LA 2.0 conspiracy theory?
Oh, the conspiracies. So that's the thing. LA had proposed that they were going to make like a future city,
Hmm.
and it's going to be a
Right.
green
Right.
LA, the
A
Green
smart city.
Deal, smart city. And they even said the same thing with Lahaina in Maui.
Hmm.
And they just, you know, having a fresh, clean start and gee, I can start from nothing and new building codes and I can push people. That
Hmm.
that is kind of something that you're like, gee, it kind of seems, but I gotta say, as much as the conspiracy goes, I would say those Santa Ana winds have been, this kind of thing seemed like it was inevitable from way back. I don't think you need lasers and future weapons to start fires in California.
Yeah.
Um, it, it's tough, and nobody wants to see. I mean, that devastation and destruction. It's kind of like, gee, my house is the only one surrounded by 5 miles of burnout everything that survived. Yeah, your stuff is there, but you can't even get to your stuff. Maybe
Right.
after the whole thing. So, again, it's all it's hard to accept. I don't know. I don't think that the conspiracy stuff, I don't think it's really accurate, but I think it does make you raise an eyebrow because it is very convenient.
Right.
That's all I can say. It is very convenient for the government in these situations, would be my take on that.
Yeah, I don't usually buy into any of these I feel like a lot of these conspiracy theories, they come up with theory first and then try and look for stuff to support, what
Yeah.
they already assume is happening. Um but
They fill in the blanks. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not going to put it past anybody to do some shady shit like that either.
Yeah. Well, that's it. So I don't know. That's what I got on that. But anyway, if you guys left comments, questions, concerns, thoughts, things you want to know about, you can email us at preppingbadass@gmail.com. Otherwise, I would say stay safe and we will talk to you guys next week.